My name is Sarah Komarniski, and I'm a new PhD student in the Department of Anthropology, and I'd like to welcome all of you to the first talk in the 60th anniversary colloquium series full cycle of this semester. I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to introduce you to UBC Anthropology's own Dr. Millie Creighton. It's been great to meet with Dr. Creighton and learn a bit about the background to her talk today, so I can share it with you. Dr. Creighton studied at the University of Washington in Seattle, receiving an MA and a PhD from that institution. Her dissertation was an anthropological analysis of Japanese department stores, and after that, she held a postdoctoral fellowship at the Reischauer Institute of Japanese Studies at Harvard University. From Harvard, she came to the Department of Anthropology at UBC and is currently an associate professor in our department. A Japan specialist, Dr. Creighton has spent a lot of time there, focusing on a wide variety of research interests that can be grouped into three interrelated themes. Consumer culture and popular culture, especially department stores, advertising, film, media, and tourism. International perspectives on Japan, or Japan's place in the world, including the Japanese diaspora and Japanese-Korean relations. And minorities in Japan. And Dr. Creighton's research in this area began at a time when Japan said that they had no minorities. In 1997, she published an article in a groundbreaking book called Japan's Minorities, The Illusion of Homogeneity, which began to show otherwise. Her work with the Ainu, for instance, overlaps this transition from a homogenous Japan to the start of recognition of minorities within Japan. Her talk today, entitled Japan and the Special Olympics and Obama, and repeat that over and over again, Recirculating Minorities, Margins, and Main Stages in Modern Japan, bridges these interests. Based on her involvement as a volunteer during the Special Olympic World Winter Games in Nagano in 2005, and her research on Obama, Japan, the place, in 2009, Dr. Creighton will talk to us about the Winter Olympics here in Vancouver, the election of Barack Obama as they reflect globalizing insights on movements surrounding minorities and marginalization in Japan that contest hierarchies of people and of place and space. So with that, I give you Dr. Millie Creighton.
Well, thank you for that very nice introduction. First, so as not to cause confusion, I wanted to explain a bit about the title. The idea here is that I'm trying to link these concepts. So it is about Japan and the Special Olympics, and about the Special Olympics and Obama, and about Obama and Japan. So you just keep going around in a circle. It seems like many things, but we have now entered the so-called age of multitasking, which I have been accused of being delayed in getting on as a person that thinks that people should do one thing at a time. So I'm trying to embrace it here and actually introducing the concept of multi-speeching in a sense. So that's what we are involved in. But indeed, I'm trying to use these circles, and circles are very important in Japan. It embraces the concept of harmony, and in that idea of the sun, which is a Japanese identity image, and harmony and the sense of Japanese identity there. And this sort of twin circles of the Olympics here, the Special Olympics and Obama, as vehicles to sort of show how diversity is being increasingly addressed, and how longstanding cultural ideas and definitions of Japan as a homogeneous society are being challenged, and also how those kinds of challenges are occurring globally. In the long-standing view of Japan of a harmonious, homogeneous society of similarity, this was also linked to an idea of organization hierarchically, which defined ranked stations or categories of people and also of place, with once the expectation that both people and places accepted and assumed their proper place. And in terms of invoking the two different arenas or circles of my talk, I am going to open them with opening words of speeches made in Japan by two US presidents on different occasions, former US President Bill Clinton and current US President Barack Obama. Now, in saying that, I am sensitive to my own dual identity as both a Canadian and American citizen, and that we are situated here in Canada and in Vancouver, so I hope to integrate comments about those places into the talk in Canada as well. Okay, starting with the Special Olympic World Winter Games, as held in Japan in Nagano in 2005. Notably, was sort of a flag from that Special Olympics. This was the first time that the Special Olympic World Winter Games were ever held in Asia. And even more notable, it is the first time they were ever held at the same sites as the Olympics and the Paralympics. The Olympics and the Paralympics occur together, and the Special Olympics occur as a separate entity. And for the first time, they were utilizing the same sites as the Olympics and the Paralympics. Japan had hosted the Olympics in Nagano, Japan in 1998, and it was those venues, sites, and installations for the Olympics and Paralympics of that time that were used for the Special Olympic World Winter Games in 2005. This was truly a very important marker for Japan. And I did go there as a volunteer, and I hope to explain why that I felt that was an important thing for me to do. Prior to the opening of those Special Olympics, the Olympic torch made its way to Nagano, going throughout Japan, as we see the Winter Olympics torch going through Canada here, and involving different venues all through Japan, and typically also involving special athletes and other people with intellectual disabilities in those presentations, as that was televised throughout Japan and written up by journalists in newspapers and other media. On March 26th, at the opening ceremonies to the game, then Prime Minister Junichiro Koizumi opened the games with Rina Arakaki, a 17-year-old Special Olympic athlete and gold medalist from Okinawa, reciting the representative oath, "Let me win, but if I cannot win, let me be brave in the attempt." This is the slogan of the Special Olympics. Notable that someone from Okinawa was chosen, perhaps in reference to the other part of my talk dealing with place hierarchies in Japan. Japan's Crown Prince Naruhito also officiated at the opening, expressing the hope that these Nagano Games would, I think very important comments here in his words as translated into English, become an opportunity to deepen the Japanese people's understanding of the Special Olympics movement, promote social participation by people with intellectual disabilities, and enhance the creation of a warm society open to everyone. I wish to emphasize, however, the comments made the following day to the Global Youth Summit at the Games upon a surprise visit and welcoming speech by former US President Bill Clinton. Clinton opened his comments with the greeting of a Central African tribe and then explained that they literally meant, "I see you." Clinton followed this with the comments, "Most of us spend our whole lives not seeing people, but my advice is simple. You're beautiful, give people the chance to see you." What was particularly noteworthy about this, for this occasion and given context, is that people with disabilities were often not seen. Historically, this was dramatically so in Japan, where people with disabilities, both physical and intellectual, were often kept hidden in the inner recesses, or as literally called in Japan, the back, oku areas of household compounds. Japan, through the 1980s and into the 1990s, was often criticized on its record of treatment regarding disabilities because of this, but these movements have been progressing in Japan, and indeed, Japan making this very progressive step of having the Special Olympics occurring at the same site as the Olympics and Paralympics Games. In 2005, I was the UBC visiting professor to Ritsumeikan University that year, and the Special Olympic World Winter Games were occurring over the academic term, and as many other universities were doing, Ritsumeikan University had a volunteer campaign, and I did join this, and so I went to Nagano, and my job there, I was an awards ceremony announcer, so I became one of the voices of Nagano, which means people didn't necessarily see me, but they heard me, as I found out from many of them later in interesting ways. And they heard me all day, because actually, although there are pivotal announcements, I was working in the snowshoeing areas in particular, and although there are pivotal announcements where, similar to what we are familiar with the Olympics, you have the winning medalists in various categories, there's actually ongoing events all day. So I'm announcing the winners or the finishing times of athletes, the countries they're from, and the records they were making pretty much all day long during those events. I have been involved either with Japan either as a student, a researcher, or worker or family member for a long, long time, maybe longer than I want to admit now, but for a long time. And I think I have been witnessing big shifts in these areas, certainly from the 1980s when I was doing some of my research, and in particular, I think from 1995 with this sort of major movement of the coming out of people with disabilities in Japan to be seen for the first time, or increasingly at public places, in parks, at important festivals, in large city cores, and on public transit. Things such as Osaka International Youth Hostel putting in facilities that allowed the disabled to stay at the hostel, traveling in groups as people typically do in Japan, so that they, with people who are working with them, could be staying at the hostel. This is very important in the Japanese context because these hostels are used for school children in travel groups, and it meant that other children growing up in Japan also are seeing people with disabilities, and it's become a familiar thing in Japan. When I first started teaching here and discussing issues of disabilities in Japan, I had students who actually had lived in Japan come up to me after my lectures and say that until my lectures, they didn't know there were people with disabilities in Japan because they were never seen, and they thought Japan simply did not have people with disabilities. So I think Clinton's words, very pertinent for Japan, but also lest we over-criticize Japan, which I think would also be a problem, it's important to note that Clinton was making this opening greeting not to the athletes from Japan only, but to everyone globally gathered for that event, realizing that people with both physical and intellectual disabilities were often once kept hidden, or at least seen elsewhere and in many places of the world, including in North America. Okay, and sort of, so I can take it off, I did bring and am wearing my official volunteer Special Olympics Winter World Games jacket from Nagano, Japan, which I don't have a slide of. Instead, I simply brought the actual material thing. I will see if I can hang that up there along with our torch. One of the nice things about having this in Nagano, in addition to it being the sites of the Olympics and Paralympics, Nagano has great onsen, or the natural hot springs baths, and great historic buildings like this one that one has a chance to enjoy. Okay, switching to the Obama focus. And the opening words of another presidential speech. On Saturday, November 14th, 2009, while visiting Japan, U.S. President Barack Obama gave an address at Suntory Hall in Tokyo. And in the opening to that address, he first won the affection of Japanese people by mentioning his visit to Japan as a child. President Obama, as a child, was brought to Japan by his mother to visit Kamakura. His mother, of course, trained in anthropology, we have to mention for the sake of our department. Took him to Kamakura to see the great Buddha, and in referring to this in his speech, President Obama said that actually he was more interested in the matcha ice cream that he got in Kamakura than in the great Buddha, and people seemed to like that comment a lot. He then, in his opening, went on to say, "Thank you very much. I have never forgotten the warmth and the hospitality that the Japanese people showed a young American far from home. And I feel that same spirit on this visit, in the gracious welcome of Prime Minister Hatoyama, in the extraordinary honor of the meeting with their Imperial Majesties, the Emperor and Empress, on the 20th anniversary of his ascension to the chrysanthemum throne, in the hospitality shown by the Japanese people, and of course, I could not come here without sending my greetings and gratitude to the citizens of Obama, Japan." Now, what struck me, let me see if I'm at Obama. This is, I'll just mention this quickly before we get, well, I'll come back to this actually. What struck me about this opening line is that in the same opening sentiments to this speech, President Obama is referencing people that once at a time in Japan would be very differentially, hierarchically associated. You have the Prime Minister, you have the Empress and the Emperor and Empress, who of course would be given sort of the highest representation in those hierarchical concepts. You have the Japanese people would be at a little bit different level, and Obama Japan as a place would have been hierarchically sort of in a lesser position being on the back side of Japan than those who are living on the front side of Japan. So in this speech, note people or those from any pivotal location or city or area on the so-called front side of Japan, Tokyo, Kyoto, Osaka being major cities, and many more from that side of Japan are mentioned, and instead those from Obama being a place location on the back side of Japan. These are not my terms, these are how they are referred to in Japan. There is a front side and there is a back side. Switchbacks to the Special Olympics. I'm thinking here of my colleague Jennifer Kramer and her book Switchbacks. We're going back and forth here between the Olympics and Obama. Further images of the Special Olympic World Winter Games. Anthropologists have that need perhaps to situate themselves. You have to show that you were there. The being there, either part of the text or visual image. This is mine. This obviously shows that I was there. Those of you that know the Japanese, that's me over there, Millie, and my certification for that, the games. And if you don't read the Japanese, I put it in there in English for you. Sort of my official sort of recognition of my presence there. The Special Olympic World Winter Games, approached by those involved with the same intensity, sometimes with the same international tensions, rivalries, and scandals that occur for the Olympics or the Paralympic Games. There we have one of the athletic competitions for the Games being represented there. The Special Olympics, I make some commentary about the Special Olympics here, is not only an athletic competition, but considers itself as a global movement. The term Special Olympics is used for what is always an ongoing sort of process with about 30,000 events occurring in over 180 countries now. The Special Olympics involves an attempt to educate societies against previous stereotypes of people with intellectual disabilities and towards attitudes of inclusion and valuing diversity, indeed celebrating diversity and difference. And here we had the theme for the Nagano Olympics was let's celebrate together. It also involves the extension of ideas of promoting good physical health and ideas of physical health, well-being, and those examinations to all participants or to all people with intellectual disabilities as well as others. As a background to the Special Olympics, the movement's founder, Eunice Kennedy Shriver, the movement traces its beginnings to Chicago in 1968 when on a steamy hot afternoon of July 20th, Eunice Kennedy Shriver made the opening address at Soldiers Field in Chicago to convene what was called the first Special Olympics International Games. It was only 7 weeks after her brother Robert Kennedy was killed and shortly before the Democratic Convention held that year in the same place, Chicago. There were 1,000 athletes from 26 of the US states and from Canada, allowing it to be referred to as the International Games. The Soldiers Field Stadium, where it was presented, holds seats for 85,000 spectators, and there were less than 100 of them in those seats. The press, therefore, largely ignored the whole thing, as it's reported. But not to be defeated, Shriver steadfastly proclaimed that someday, in Japanese, itsuka, someday, the gathering would bring together 1 million people with intellectual disabilities. And indeed, today there are over 3 million people competing in Special Olympics events in over 180 countries. The first international Special Olympic Winter Games followed, Winter Games followed in 1977, and they're covered by CBS, ABC, and NBC. Both summer and winter games occur at intervals and at designated sites, and they have to go through a process of applying for them and winning those competitions. Vancouver also has a well-developed Special Olympics programs. Again, that's an ongoing program, so it's not the Special Olympics World Winter Games that's being held here or being hosted here. It's the Olympics and Paralympics, although there are some Special Olympics athletes that are involved in some of those events. Okay, in Nagano, as these were being held, pivotally also important that exhibits, for example, department stores, where I've done a lot of research, holding exhibits, photograph exhibits of the Special Olympics or people involved in them. An art exhibit, this particular art exhibit of people, work done by people with special intellectual disabilities. Also, NHK published a book, One Heart, One World, NHK major broadcaster in Japan. Again, sort of dealing with that topic and showing that art. And then we have one of the One Heart, One World art pieces and these installations everywhere. Over 10,000 volunteers in different capacities at those Special Olympics. Some of them international volunteers from outside Japan, but the vast majority, of course, volunteers from within Japan. So again, a very different sort of involvement within Japan. I want to discuss this in relationship to other disabilities movements in Japan, the Special Olympics for people with intellectual disabilities, but it also parallels other movements that have been going on in the last 20 years with the coming out and into visibility so that people can see them of people with other forms of disabilities, sort of physical disabilities, the hearing impaired movement, bringing that into consciousness. This particular image I actually took at the Global Article 9 Summit, dealing with the sort of constitutional issues that was held in Chiba, Japan in 2008, and it was a singing event, and in addition to singing, they were also signing or singing by signing because the audience consisted of both hearing abled and hearing impaired individuals, so that sort of realization of other forms of diversity and physical diversity as well. As it was mentioned, as this links also to the greater recognition of set minorities, so different forms of marginalization that previously existed, movements of Ainu to gain recognition for their status, other designated minority groups in Japan that have long been there but have often been sort of pushed to the sidelines or not acknowledged in this idea of homogeneous Japan. Okay. Switching back to Obama again. Before I get into that talk, I want to link, actually let me link Obama with the Special Olympics briefly. We'll have the One Heart, One Mind. This is sort of my connector. We have the Special Olympics and we have Obama in the Special Olympics, and then we go on to talk about Obama or Obama in Japan. On March 19th, 2009, President Obama on the Tonight Show with Jay Leno, as was well reported, made the unfortunate gaffe of joking about his bowling performance while he was practicing bowling at the White House. Actually, he was sort of making a humbling and deprecating sort of sense of himself when discussing this bowling with Jay Leno, but then said that he would say that his performance was more Special Olympics-like. Although seemingly not aware of the problem while the show was airing, the awareness of the inappropriateness of the remarks surfaced soon afterwards. And you know, in thinking about this event, a lot has been reported about this comment, but I think it also, you know, shows other shifts occurring. Presidents going on popular television shows like The Tonight Show, or in Obama's case, The Oprah Show, so that coming together of the political world and the popular culture world in ways that maybe it once they were not brought together in the US. One of the reasons this statement was, of course, difficult for Obama, as reported, is that the Kennedys had been his major supporters, and again, the Kennedys being deeply tied to the Special Olympics, both in terms of initiating it and maintaining and its ongoing involvement with it as part of it. Less discussed, but perhaps also noteworthy, is that the Special Olympics traces its beginning precisely to the state and city Obama was from, Chicago, Illinois, and it celebrated its 40th anniversary during his election year in 2008, in which, in the same year, Eunice Kennedy Shriver was named Sportsman of the Year. My understanding is that's a designation that was used, Sportsman of the Year, for her role in founding them. Obama was suitably apologetic and immediately sent his official apology to Tim Shriver, Eunice Kennedy Shriver's son, who is the CEO of the Special Olympics at this time. And while acknowledging the apology, Shriver pointing out that the president was sincere and heartfelt. Shriver nonetheless went on to point out that words hurt and words matter. Words can cause pain and result in stereotypes that are unfair and damaging to people with intellectual disabilities. As someone who shares that concept and an interest in the importance of words, I think we can also generalize that commentary beyond people with intellectual disabilities, perhaps more generally, and pick up his words. Words hurt and words matter. Words can cause pain and result in stereotypes that are unfair and damaging to people. I'm not sort of bringing up this comment by Obama to browbeat or overly criticize Obama on it, but because when this incident occurred, again, this resonated with me strongly because of my involvement as a volunteer in Nagano, and I think this comment perhaps reflects a sort of unthought about or unconsciously assumed assumption that many people have that athletes involved in the Special Olympics would probably not be as capable as other athletes or would not necessarily have the same level of athletic performance. The Special Olympics, or at the Special Olympics World Winter Games, or at the Summer Games, there are many categories of competition, and this is something of a contrast with, I believe, the Olympics and Paralympics. There are many more categories because the athletes are divided much more according to the type of intellectual disability they have and the skill level, and so you have many, many more categories. But among them, you also have people who may have intellectual disabilities but are profound physically or athletically, and they're training all year and have extremely high and remarkable athletic performances. And I remember sort of coming to this consciousness myself actually in the process of making these announcements, which at first I don't think that I was thinking about it at all or one way or another. And when I started in the job, maybe like any job, I'm concerned to get it right. And I'm up there making announcements. There was an announcer announcing in Japanese, and I would announce in English. It was very busy. I'm dealing with names of people from all over the world, trying to get them correct as I'm announcing names, the countries that they're from, and their finishing times for various events. And I remember once realizing that these times and these scores were incredibly pronounced, developed, and high scores, and almost unreasonably so. And I realized quite well that these, there are those that are up there at any level of athletic competition. Okay, Japan. It's going to bring us to Obama, Japan, switching back to Obama, Japan. Japan has been a society, again, that long identifies around this idea of a presumed cultural homogeneity. And this sort of sense also positions it as a sense of Japaneseness or the inside in contrast to outside. But Japan operates in the outer world. And what was noticeable perhaps about Obama's election in the US, or one of the aspects of it wishing to discuss, was the way it affected or the way it reflects Japanese potentially changing attitudes or stereotypes about different racial categories. Stereotypes that until then, and here I would like to mention along with my own the work of John Russell, a Black American Harvard-trained PhD and anthropologist who's worked a lot on this topic. The positioning of racial categories, and typically blacks in a lower positioning, but also people like Russell noting that a lot of this did not develop innately in Japan necessarily, but represents contact of Japan with the outside world and sort of learning these concepts as they did from the outside world at that time. During the Obama election campaigns, I was therefore struck with differing or shifting acceptance of Obama as a US presidential candidate than my earlier experiences in Japan. And here in particular, I was living in Japan, when Jesse Jackson was in the 1980s for some time a candidate as well for the US Democratic nomination. So he would appear on television. I think it's important to note that in Japan, with the close links Japan has had to the the US. These events are very strongly televised and followed in Japan. And many of the Japanese reacted to this with at best confusion. They did not understand why he was appearing on television with the other candidates, and I would say because he's a candidate, and they would say, well, that can't be. And I would say, why? And they would say, well, typically I would get the response, he's African, not American. It did not seem reasonable to them that as a black person he was appearing, and that response was quite strong. I think in mentioning Jackson, I would also like to mention that Jesse Jackson was pivotal and active in Japan, and as part of a movement, I think, dealing with those kinds of reactions and attempting to sort of shift those attitudes towards blacks in Japan. Now, something seemingly, to me at least, remarkably different happened with the campaign of Barack Obama, in that he gained immense popularity among at least large numbers of Japanese, and has been billed as the first Pacific president. His name has gone into Chinese character that bear the sounds of his name, will also have the meaning of the back horse. This is not necessarily negative. The characters for oku, or back, and to bundle something up, and the character for horse, somewhat suggesting this idea of the come from behind horse or come from the back horse that went on to tie it up or win. Japan, in a sense, we can say, actually went for Obama here in the election, very much actively sort of embracing, or at least there was a great deal of popularity of Obama during that election campaign. I'm maneuvering a bit here with my images because this for Obama, of course, does not refer to the US President Obama at all. This is a transportation sign for a directional sign for Obama, the place. Those signs now being written most frequently in both Japanese, English, and sometimes other languages, Chinese and Korean more frequently in Japan. So sort of a designation for Obama, referring to the place of Obama, which is located on what is called Ura Nihon. Ura also means back. Both oku and ura in different ways mean back. And Nihon, Japan. So it's located on what is called in Japan Ura Nihon, or the back side of Japan, in contrast to the Pacific Ocean side, which is known as Omote Nihon, or the front side of Japan. And Obama, Japan, really, I'll show you an image there. It's a port town, a seaport town located, again, on the back side of Japan, took center stage during those presidential elections because they got very involved with that election, and so involved that they won the international spotlight, scenes of Obama, Japan, clearly throughout Asia. That became very clear to me on my sabbatical last year, because when I was in Hong Kong, China, Korea, I say I'm a Japan specialist, people would say, oh, have you ever been to Obama? And I could say, yes, I have. And formerly, no one would ever ask me if I'd been to Obama. I actually first learned about Obama in the US because Obama Japan got gaining a name for itself in the US during those election campaigns, and we can see therefore President Obama actually thanking or recognizing the people of Obama in his speech, becoming in that sense very important, and thus during the US election campaign, Japan getting a lot of attention because of this venue of Obama Japan. So, and that's always well thought of. You're bringing a lot of international attention to Japan, which otherwise wouldn't necessarily be involved in the US elections at that time. So Obama, Japan becomes a sort of hot, sort of special stage. Now, this partly resulted, and I think this had a big influence on Japan overall, because Obama Japan is bringing a lot of international attention to Japan based on its name linkage with Obama, and therefore that's popular in Japan as well. And so there's another reason for people to embrace Obama. But Obama Japan in particular went, point out this concept of first front side and back side of Japan. The Pacific seaside, which is this area of Japan, referred to as the front side of Japan. And you can see all of the, there are major cities on the other side as well, but sort of the most dense cities all along the coast of that side. And on the other side, what is called Ura Nihon, or the back side of Japan. It's also referred to as Nihonkai, or the Japan seaside, but that designation is very not liked by Koreans, so the only other way I know of referring to it is the back side of Japan. And Obama, Japan, located there on that side of Japan as a port town that's between, China, Korea, linking potentially to Southeast Asia and Russia. And Obama, Japan goes Obama mania during those US elections. And I cannot sort of emphasize enough the extent to which Obama, Japan embraces Obama. You have the Obama for Obama campaign, the I Love Obama campaign, involving everything. And in anthropological terms, we talk about wrapping space. This is something that's used in academics and in anthropology. I noticed, actually, since we have mentioned the Winter Olympics coming up here, that this has now Vancouver. I have heard on the radio that the city is being wrapped for the Olympics. So the same kind of nomenclature. So during the election campaigns and still on, the wrapping of Obama Japan for that embracing of the Obama campaign. Everywhere you go, it's there. And in other ways, we have, if you want to buy goods related to Obama, they sell everything. You can get your I Love Obama stickers, as I have. Of course, the I Love Obama t-shirts. I'm unwrapping myself as we go through the talk. But I'm only talking about the Special Olympics and Obama, so that's as far as we get unwrapped. The Obama goods of this nature. Another scene from the, typically cities in Japan will have this representative sort of city museum or history pavilion, and these are from that. This is the other one of the anthropologist was there images, in case you didn't notice. I mean, that's myself with the face through that. And prior to the election of Barack Obama, if you went to that history Obama City Museum, you would find, an emphasis on the weaving textiles, the seafood products, the other meibutsu, or special products of Obama. And it's still all about the special products of Obama, but now the special products of Obama are all about Obama, like the t-shirts, and you have all of these representations of Obama there. And of course, we have the Yes We Can banner, I believe the puppy, everywhere being presented for you. In case you wanted to know what Obama would look like in a kimono, we have that now in Japan, along with other very important Japanese identity symbols. So here we have Obama, the person, being brought together with pivotal Japanese identity symbols, the bunraku, classic Japanese puppet theater, cherry blossoms on the hillside in that particular painting that's there. This concept of change and people talking about change in relationship to the Obama campaign and embracing that. Again, all kinds of paraphernalia that one can buy. And of course, speaking about Japan, you can never get away from the ubiquitous keychains that are a necessity of any kind of travel engagement, and those from Obama Japan representing Obama, the person. In Japan, these, when people travel, it's common to buy a lot of souvenirs to bring back, and so you need to have, for people so keychains become important because you can buy a lot of them and they represent the place and they don't cost so much. Okay, so along with Barack Obama himself, the representations of the first family, other representations here. Now, partly what is important to me here is not only this emphasis on Obama Japan and this very playfulness in which Obama Japan embraces Obama the person, but that Obama Japan, and I think a sort of background to Obama, pivotally important here in my sort of interest in Obama as being part of the backside of Japan, dealing with the concept of Obama, the person, as the back horse, as the kanji suggests, for the characters for his name. That Obama Japan, although located on what is called the backside of Japan, and not a very noted place prior to the 2008 elections in recent times in Japan, was once a very important and pivotal international port. And when we get into the earlier centuries in the 1400s, 1500s, this was a very important place in Japan and a very highlighted, spotlighted international port area during those centuries when Japan, rather than the Western world, is looking towards China, and therefore this seaport that had pivotal access to China, to Korea, to Russia, and to Southeast Asia was very important, very pivotal in the sort of mindset of that time. And of course, it fell out of prominence. But there is, among the people of Obama, sort of this attitude that has gone along that someday, itsuka, something would happen to bring back the focal glory, the spotlight, the national and international importance that Obama Japan once had. I call this the Oracle of Obama. They don't use that term. But this sort of strong belief, this sort of ishiki or sense that someday something will happen to return the international prominence and the prominence within Japan of Obama. And then along came Obama. So, the people of Obama jumped on his presidential campaign. And in visiting Obama Japan, I clearly did not get any sense that there was any debate over this. Nobody was asking, is this what we've been waiting for? Is it the real thing? They've been waiting 500 years, and there was no concern over racial categories. None of them wanted to wait any longer for a potential white US presidential candidate named Obama. They simply decided to embrace Obama and went out of their way doing this. Now, I need to work in some further Canadian concepts here, so I do want to mention there was an article published on Obama Japan in 1997 in Monumenta Nipponica. Actually, as far as I know, it's the only scholarly article that's ever been published on Obama Japan, at least before 2008, in English, by Soranaka Isao, and who was an associate professor of history at the University of Western Ontario at that time. And among those of us in this room, one of the things that we were involved in when I first came here is establishing the Japan Studies Association of Canada and Japanese Studies in Canada. If I could mention our colleague from the University of Victoria, Patricia Sarumi, who goes by Patty. And when I was first doing this, and for a few years, I could never tell where people were saying Patty or Patty. And this actually was, now we would just do an internet search and it would be clear, but that was in the era BI, or before internet, which seems unbelievable now. So I wasn't quite clear, and then I'd known her too long to ask her whether it was Patty or Patty. But finally I did. I apologized and I said, gee, I'm not quite sure if it's Patty or Patty, and I'm really sorry to even ask. And she said, I'm happy you asked. She said, because someone actually published an article in which they thank me in the acknowledgments, and they put in Patty, and it's supposed to be Patty. Well, this is the article. There's Patty, or in the article it says Patty Sarumi, who is mentioned in the acknowledgments. So Patty Sarumi has her second chance to not be famous again in 2008, when this article actually comes into important prominence. Not only in Japan, but it became a very prominent article along with the Obama campaign and in political circles as well. Okay. In terms of that campaign, I think we can also mention Obama continuing to be very popular in Japan. In fact, this month's Essence magazine in the US notes that Obama, the person, has now become a verb in Japanese. The verb obamu, this is how verbs are formed in Japan, is now used in Japanese, meaning referring to being cool and surging ahead positively towards change, being used by youth as Obama, I guess obamu, so in the past tense, obamimashita, obandemas, probably if you're in the present tense. And people picking up these words and lines. And most notably, perhaps, and has gotten a lot of attention in Japan as well, the campaign, his nomination acceptance speech that is being used in Japan, actually, as I understand it, to teach English in schools and juku. No, Julie in there. And so from that speech, the most famous line, of course, being, "Yes, we can." And a line repeated again and again in that crusade for hope and change. Now, we are all familiar, I think, with this line, "Yes, we can," and with the thought, but I would like to ask you, what does it look like? And I don't know if we've given it that much thought, although we do present it in visual form. I got my Obama wobbly doll from the US, actually at the after the AAA convention in San Francisco. And of course, we have "Yes, we can" presented visually, but I'm not sure that that really creates the most valid material manifestation. And here, in Art as a Cultural System, anthropologist Clifford Geertz points out that one of the values of art and material culture in general is that it allows the possibility of bringing an idea into material form where people can look at it. And the people of Obama, Japan apparently did just that with "Yes, we can." So if you're not sure what "Yes, we can" looks like, the people of Obama, Japan created the "Yes, we can." That is actually it. I have it here. I am holding "Yes, we can" from Obama, Japan in my hand. You know, I can do that. So either the people of Obama, Japan here reflecting anthropologist Geertz's concepts of this universal, potentially universal human tendency, or possibly a greater connection to the idea of language and culture. And I think it's important to point out that Japan is a society in which English is not the first language, but everyone studying English or has studied English, particularly of a certain age, which is no longer young, has had to study English for several years. And the likelihood that the thought in English or the words in English, "Yes, we can," probably immediately resonate with the idea of a "can" as well as "can," and sort of the Japanese putting together this "yes, we can" thought. Okay, so getting to the end of time, I'd like to get to some conclusions. I would like to link the twin circles of this talk of the Special Olympics and Obama with reference to this concept of back that I have been talking about in society, suggesting the marginalization of various types of peoples and places. Obama's, it's not a very good image, but perhaps you can see it. Obama's letter to the people of Obama during 2008, President Obama's then, his election campaign committee, as part of that, Obama sent this letter to the people of Obama, Japan. Everybody in Obama, Japan has one too. Points out that they share more than just a name. That they share something else in terms of sharing the same globe, sharing the same social responsibilities. Now, on one hand, perhaps for the people of Obama, the most important thing was that they shared a name, but I think there is something else being shared here, and it reflects other kinds of ideas. The Special Olympics reflects a process of people with disabilities, here intellectual disabilities, but also paralleling movements in Japan of those with physical disabilities coming out so they can actually be seen. Previously, these all represent categories of people who were kept or relegated to the back, to the oku, which means back, to the inner back recesses of households where they couldn't be seen. So the Special Olympics World Winter Games show the coming forward from the back to the front of society of people with disabilities who were previously hidden. Obama, the person, as the name is put into Chinese characters, suggesting the back horse. It has the sounds of Obama, but it also has this meaning of the back horse, and sort of the suggestion that the back horse that went on to tie it all up, or in a sense to win, reflects the pivotal barrier, breaking of that barrier of having the first African American or biracial president. So this sort of coming from the back of marginalized groups in other ways. The shifting positioning of ideas of blacks as it has occurred in Japan, but also elsewhere. And this has not been fully, of course, accomplished, and there are sort of back shifts. There was one television commercial made in Japan utilizing the idea of Obama giving a speech, but Obama is played, I guess, as it were, by a chimpanzee, and this got a lot of criticism because it again represents a kind of going back to some of these other ideas. And then just yesterday, a high-ranking member of the Minshito, or the current political party in charge in Japan, Ozawa, sort of criticizing this idea of going too far, embracing change, pointing out that in the US, they went so far in embracing change that they even elected a black person as president, just reported in the news. So you see that there is still this underlying current, but on the other hand, in terms of these comments that were just made, the Japanese press immediately picked this up and was critical of this. And 10 years ago, 20 years ago, this might not have been noticed as a potential comment to criticize until it's perhaps criticized in the English press and then would be. But that is criticized immediately by the Japanese press in Japan. Obama Japan, as a place positioned on the backside of Japan, emerges via the US elections as a spokesplace for all of Ura Nihon, or the backside of Japan. And I had other reason to believe that this was occurring in Japan. Again, in 2005, I was talking to a university professor who grew up in a town along Ura Nihon. I used the phrase Ura Nihon, or the backside of Japan. Not casually, I actually did it again because the only other way I know to refer to it is Nihonkai, which Koreans don't like. It means the Japan seaside. They have a different designation for that sea. But when I said Ura Nihon, he looked at me and said, well, we're not Ura Nihon. Why are we Ura Nihon? Why are we the backside of Japan? Maybe we're the front side of Japan. We were the front side of Japan once. So these feelings and things being expressed by people who were once, just accepted that designation as being on the backside of Japan. I'll mention here, in January of 2009, I was giving a talk at Emory University in Atlanta. I happened to be there for the Reverend Martin Luther King holiday that year, which occurred on Monday, January 19th of 2009. It's a Monday, Friday holiday in the US, a national holiday now. But in that year, in this year 2009, it was a very pivotal sort of thing to experience because Monday, January 19th, 2009, marking the Reverend Martin Luther King holiday being celebrated there, and Tuesday, January 20th, 2009, the date of Barack Obama's inauguration, and certainly those commemorations of the King holiday in Atlanta that year, and by the spectators, that despite, a movement that begins in the 1950s in the US, the sense of the culmination of that with President Obama's inauguration on the following day as people were celebrating it. And that movement, as started by King, mentioning the sort of now iconic figure of Rosa Parks, the idea being that for some reason at some point she simply refused to accept that she should be relegated to the back of the bus beginning this movement. So we have people who are defined or were placed at the back. I think issues of gender, women here placed at the back, and in Japan, the word for wife, for example, referring to someone else's wife, okusan, meaning person at the back, literally your honorable back or your honorable backside is how you refer to a wife, and that's the respectful way, but meaning person at the back. And so sort of the movements of women's movement in that not necessarily being what is the case in Japan, but also representing global movements elsewhere in which who is at the front and who is at the back is not so easily established, and with globalization, the sense that we have much more of a rotation rather than that. So within Japan, this sort of emphasis on the idea of Obama, embracing this again from Obama Japan, not from outside. Discussions of race, transnationalism, as Japan deals with increasing diversity, heterogeneity to some extent, mixed race or mixed heritage children. This was a symposium I was invited to speak at, also occurring in November in Japan, in which those kinds of issues in Japan being dealt with. This idea of change being embraced. In terms of my conclusions here, we have Obama the place. This says Obama is beautiful world by the Obama Galus. This is actually something that started in Obama, Japan, and there's a group that sings this song, Obama is Beautiful World, and deals with the environmental issues involved. That was happening prior to the Obama election campaigns, and that's been brought up. Now, so my conclusions mostly having to do with this issue of who's at the back and who's at the front, and places at the back, both in Japan and globally, being shifted. Other kinds of conclusions, other forms perhaps of transnationalism. Myself, I think many people in this world, as a bi-citizen, a dual citizen or a bi-citizen, and I thought I would actually I don't know, dedicate this talk, if one can say that. I think many of us are familiar with this, right? To Sean Lauer, actually, who I asked to come, Dr. Lauer, because recognizing his quiet, continual efforts in helping get people registered to vote, whether they were for the Democratic candidate in 2008 or otherwise, simply to promote those concepts of democracy and involvement. And I thought the fitting tribute would be to bring back the Yes We Can from Obama Japan for Sean. So I brought that back for Sean in all of his work and effort throughout Vancouver, so that numbers of people who were able to, either as residents in Canada or as dual citizens in Canada, could register and vote in those elections. This is another issue about which there are discussions in Japan, whether or not to allow dual citizens. As my own sort of attempt at raising international citizens, my own children were raised between Japan, the United States, and Canada as Japanese, Canadian, U.S. citizens, or at least they had all three of those citizenships. Japan now, at different points back and forth, does not allow dual citizenships. I think in part to add to that discussion, if that were allowed, there would be more people, Japanese people would have more say in international affairs and events, because they might be able to vote in those countries in those cases where they are there for a long and sort of residing in those areas and conclusions. Okay, another thought, we'll go back, sorry. I want to sort of, as a Vancouver gene, people from Obama called Obama gene. Many of us in this room, Vancouver gene, you might not have known you'd had that identity. People of Vancouver are Vancouver gene. In Japan, that might more likely be pronounced Bankuba gene, but we can say Vancouver gene. And we've now entered a new year, and it's a very important year for us in Vancouver, I think, and we're all aware of that. And we all know what this year is, right? It's the year of the tiger. And it's a good thing we know that, because now we have a way that we can refer to this year. We can say early century, 20-something, in the year of the tiger, because we have other big events happening in Vancouver in this year. We have the Winter Olympics and the Paralympics happening. And again, in noting Japan, again, I think this is a very progressive thing that Japan did and has done by hosting the Special Olympic World Winter Games at the same sites as the Olympics and Paralympics, making it the first time that all those three forms were held and dealt with at the same sites. Indeed, Japan actually remains the only country, I believe, where that has happened. And so as a Vancouver gene, person of Vancouver, perhaps I can suggest the possibility that Vancouver might want to consider this as well. And after we get beyond the Winter Olympics and Paralympics, when people are discussing what to do with all of those facilities and sites, that possibility that maybe they could be used, or there could be a bid for the Special Olympic World Winter Games, which would involve some collaboration, I think, between them both. So as one typically ends a thought with the thank you slide. this is arigato, or thank you, in Japanese, then that was written by someone with, in calligraphy with intellectual disabilities used in the Special Olympic World Winter Games in Nagano. Thank you.
The two metaphors. One that you talk about more explicitly, this back front, kind of spatializing of sort of minority groups. And then something that you alluded to more in the beginning, which is perhaps more familiar to people from outside Japan, is this kind of idea of the center or the homogeneous core, right, and then the marginal. And in some ways, there are two different kinds of scalar metaphors. And how are those, how are those kind of intersecting within Japan itself in terms of if we're spatializing minorities in the back, but trying to create a kind of core, right?
Okay.
And then how does that play in the topographies like of Obama versus Japan versus Tokyo, et cetera?
Okay. Well, first of all, I mean, in terms of minorities, and I did not discuss them mostly in this, there are specific groups understood, I think, as minorities. The Ainu, which has now gained a recognition as being a minority. We have, there's resident Koreans. There are Ainu as an Aboriginal group, Okinawans, others that are recognizable groups. But then you have issues of marginalization, and I think looking at disabilities are one of them, but they're tied to the issues of minorities as marginalization. I think in part, it's important to sort of conceptualize the nature of homogeneity as suggesting everyone is one people, but at the same time that is hierarchically orchestrated, which I think is a very different kind of understanding of sameness than might be present in a society or culture that historically has a model or an has emerged from a model of the concept of equality as sameness. So here it's the idea of everyone in a similar, same culture that arranges things hierarchically. And so part of that hierarchy has to do with people's ranks and statuses, and that has to do with, even small groups, even in families, right? I mean, siblings are, the sort of traditional older brother is in a higher status than younger brother, older sister in a higher status than younger sister kind of idea. And you get that with place. So you get this sense of it's one sort of circle, but the circle is organized in a hierarchical way. And the front has more of a, hierarchical sense than the back.
And so in some ways it's mapping onto these, even perhaps a public-private?
Yes. Has that, along with this uchi-soto, inside-outside, it overlaps with this idea of omote and ura, front and back. And I think the comments that I referred to from this university professor from this town on Ura Nihon, it's very interesting because in terms of that front in Japan, front and back and inside and outside, one of the reasons the Pacific Seaside is kind of the front side is that, yes, Japan looking outward from the Pacific Seaside once it is looking outward towards the West and other countries, and sort of the suggestion here that at some point in Japan's history, the looking outward was towards the other side, and in particular China. And some people suggesting, whereas the 20th century is Japan looking towards the West, maybe the 21st century, as Asia, the prominence of Asia and China perhaps and other parts of Asia, Japan might indeed be again more looking the other direction, so that which side is the looking outward side might be shifting.
Hello, someone who also volunteered in Nagano. It's exciting to be here.
Thank you. I'm glad you came.
Yeah, yes. I wouldn't have missed it. Just a question, we're talking about the spatialization. What we have is a situation that for the Special Olympics, there are a number of economic factors that also led to it being sort of the success that it was. There was Nagano after the Winter Olympics had really become marginalized again. And what it is they had all these facilities that were not being used. And so the people in Nagano really took to this very much. And that whole prefecture really took to it very much. Also, from an economic point of view, Japan there wasn't anything going on at that time, so there was a particular sort of attraction to using this, quote, worldwide event. I guess the question is how much has that continued since that time? In other words, has the coming out of the mentally challenged and mentally handicapped, which was very unusual at that time, how has that persisted? In other words, we saw this blip. The question is, did it continue?
I haven't been back to Nagano since 2005, and I think I would embrace and reiterate your comments there about the people of Nagano specifically and the degree to which they campaigned for this Special Olympic World Winter Games and the degree to which they embraced it. And again, working at those Special Olympic venues, the bringing in of school children and their interaction from throughout Nagano, you know, to interact with those Special Olympics athletes and that kind of activity being very, very important. I don't think it's just a blip, because I do think it's indeed linked to other processes that are going on in Japan that, you know, did begin in a sense before 2005. They've been growing. I mean, they just haven't. They've been happening, you know, gradually, or there have been movements in Japan, but I think they've really taken off largely. And again, I don't know if I want to place a date. I know I become very aware of that at some point in the 1990s. And to me, I'm much more aware about 1995 on of sort of myself when I go to Japan. You know, sort of in that Clinton address, I see you, and why it resonated with me so much is that, yes, I am seeing people with various forms of disabilities in ways I never did before in Japan. And that's why I think I want to reference that both in relationship to the intellectual disabilities being, you know, represented in the Special Olympics, but also with people with physical disabilities, and that being something that is very common now. You know, I think initially there was, when Japan was sort of expected to put in things to make cities barrier-free for people with physical disabilities as well. There's a great deal of resistance to that. I think in part it's because, again, you know, Japan is a very old society, and those cities are very built in, and I think in many cases it was very difficult to do, at least difficult to do based on models from elsewhere about how that space was dealt with, until, you know, different forms of dealing with it that fit those very congested cities and places in Japan were put into place, so that one is aware of the sort of existence and involvement of people with physical disabilities in Japan and with intellectual disabilities, and I believe shifts in legal processes calling for or allowing their rights to be understood, and in both cases sort of those movements drawing on international charters to facilitate that in a way that I believe that's going to continue. Yeah. Or at least it can't go away again as easily. Professor Durkis.
Millie, I'm volunteering for the Olympics and Paralympics. Delighted to see that that'll turn into a brilliant research topic a year or two from now, and hope I can fulfill that promise as well. But I wanted to pick up on two issues that were raised by the previous two questions as well, which is sort of spatial relations and economic factors, right? So I think I agree with what you're saying about minorities and also people with disabilities perhaps coming to the front somewhat more in Japan and elsewhere in the world, really. But at the same time, Obama is an example of a place that, not Obama itself, but everyone else on that coast basically disappearing, right?
Right.
So first of all, depopulation, the people are leaving. There are no more people left in some places. Economically, significance has almost disappeared. Rice cultivation has declined. That used to be strong all on that coast. Fish are gone. The ports have all declined, and they're mainly busy with importing, exporting used cars to Russia these days. And so in spatial terms and in regional terms, the opposite is happening, where the front dominates even more than it used to. And places like Obama show up as blips, in that case because of the name, or because of out of a sort of touristic nostalgia for the countryside and whatever else. But they're disappearing.
Right, in terms of people, the movement from areas into those major core cities occurring, combined with the lesser birth rate in Japan, but that occurring elsewhere and everywhere. So yes, that I think is occurring. However, I think it's noticeable. What sort of was, I thought, pivotally noticeable, that not only Obama Japan, but in many of these towns and cities along Buddha Japan, people expressing this idea that they didn't like this designation of backside of Japan, or didn't feel they needed to think of themselves as from the backside of Japan. Indeed, we might see that occurring, as you point out, continuing to increasingly occur in terms of the economic conditions and the kind of depopulating as people go towards, as happens in Japan, towards those major cities. I don't know if there's a possibility for the reverse, like with, sort of, there is a kind of new emphasis in Japan on being part of Asia again, and whether that would have any reason to sort of create further, development on that side of Japan, as it is pivotally closer to China, Korea, and other areas, or not, or whether this process you're referring to will simply continue. Tama.
I would like to disagree with this idea of Uranihon. Less, become less important. I'm sure that economically, what
Julian Dirkes
is happening, less economic development and all this along that. But in terms of cultural development, and particularly the traditional culture, it's still very, very important part of Japan. And that's the life of the whole, cultural growth.
Right.
Just to give you two examples, that Kanazawa is a typical, very important, typical city and prefecture on Uranihon, and then another one, the southern part of Honshu, Uranihon, is Shimane Prefecture, where the Izumo Shrine, which is the most important shrine, Shinto shrine there. And of course, Urasenge, connecting with Kanazawa, that is the important tea ceremony. The whole idea of the whole tea ceremony is, connected with that Uranihon, Kyoto. So I am not, and having myself just come back from Shimane, and I took Vancouver Chamber Choir for a number of concerts. We gave a number of concerts in Izumo. And the cultural vitality, the traditional cultural vitality which you see there, you don't see anywhere in Tokyo or even Kyoto or even Osaka. So I think it's very important for us to keep that cultural forces, in the Uranihon for Japan's cultural development.
Yeah, I think that those are very important points. So, there's sort of this economic dimension, I think, as you phrased it, except for this kind of nostalgia. But I don't think we can minimize that sort of concept of nostalgia, because another thing Japan is very wrapped up in is the reformulating of a sense of Japanese identity, and all of these things are very important to that. And so sort of reconnecting with those senses of traditional Japan, or festivals, or other kinds of identity markers that are found, but not always as easily found, in the big cities. And so those areas becoming very important. And I think I would add, often having a kind of international prominence that Japan is also aware of. And I think in other of my own work, doing work on taiko traditions in Japan, and the pivotal importance that Sado Island, which is off of the Ura Nihon, it's not even on Ura Nihon. Niigata is a city there on the backside of Japan, and from there you go off to another little island, so it's an island off of the back of Japan. Gains a kind of international fame, and then Japan is also aware of that. And this kind of thing happening, that's pivotally important. It's in addition to the Ura Nihon, I think, to mention that Japan as a country, as an island country, and often we talk about the 4 main islands, but Japan has many, many islands, thousands of islands, and those often gaining sort of more interest, and again, often internationally more interest. I mentioned this Special Olympics athlete from Okinawa. Other areas of Japan that once were defined as less central or less pivotal, people much more actively speaking about that positioning or their positioning in that sort of national identity. And so in those ways that, yeah, I think it's very important.
Well, then I'll have to disagree with both of you, if I may.
I guess I have to defend my talk. Yes, over here.
It so happens that Shiman is also one of my research sites. And, you know, to put it very bluntly, Shiman is dead. There are no people under 40 living there. Other than people who have to. Well, no, culturally as well, because it's young people have left. Basically, Izumo Taisha is you know, thousands of years of history, but of not so great relevance to contemporary Japan, I think, as much as I like to visit it. But, and you know, it's got little sort of beacon places. Shimada does with the silver mine, that's now UNESCO World Heritage Site. Kanazawa, of course, with the garden and so forth. There's little beacons, and you know, for travel brochures, yes. But in terms of the cultural relevance, and in terms of the processes that Millie's talking about, in bringing particular populations to the fore and recognizing their existence, I think it's fair to say that the West Coast is being de-recognized.
Okay, I think my point is more that those people who are defined, who have been, you know, through much of custom, defined at the back, no longer willing to accept those definitions. And so you can make in other discussions about how far they get in those movements, but very clearly people with disabilities, again, physical disabilities as well as intellectual disabilities, you know, kept themselves and their families kept them hidden. I think we have in the 1960s this very dramatic case of people with disabilities, children with disabilities induced by thalidomide, and sort of the extent to which those families agonized over bringing that case precisely because it would, you know, bring them into the public. And you have those kinds of shifts in which as I mentioned, with sort of the physical barriers to involvement with people with physical disabilities, even though once they go in, people initially, you know, not willing to use them. And so, you know, you could begin to see these things in Japan that were often different than, you know, than you would have here, that would supposedly allow people with physical disabilities or wheelchairs to gain accessibility, but no one would use them. And sort of gradually sort of there, you see these being used now because there isn't the same sort of impetus from within themselves on keeping hidden. So I think more sort of that recognition of those peoples and places defined at the back, no longer just wanting to sort of allow that definition to just be there as a defined category. And I think that's sort of Ura Nihon being part of that. Yes?
So I think we better take this opportunity to thank everybody. This fascinating discussion can go on longer, actually, but before I announce how.
We haven't heard from the younger generation yet.
Well, let's hear one last question and
or comment.
A very brief comment, and then I want to invite you all to stick around here and share some food. We have a bit of a reception that will take place apparently in this room because the sociology department has taken over the grad lounge where normally we would have our reception. So we are now relegated to the back side of the building.
But we won't just stay there, yes.
Go ahead with our last question.
Because we don't have much time, I just want to speak two impressions about the presentation. One is about the back Japan. As a young generation, I have never talked about this kind of back Japan ideology or ideas between me and like people from Shimane, people from the kind of back Japan people, and there's no such kind of stereotyping, or there's no such kind of stigma about back
No, I
Japan.
don't think there's a stigma.
Yeah, what you are talking about.
Okay.
That perception. That's one thing. And the other thing is, I think you were talking about Obama, and Obama, that city of Obama was kind of so high profile for that time, but that doesn't mean Japan is going ahead to embrace kind of this race diversity, because that was only something like because we tend to embrace the change. Many population of Japanese people did like to have the word change. And there was not such kind of thing about argument around race or argument around the minorities and so on. But that was just like, the kind of boom of Obama because he was cool. And for the city of Obama, that was because there was a depopulation in the city. They just wanted to make the city alive. That was just only the motivation for them to celebrate the kind of Obama movement. That doesn't have any kind of relation to the whole Japanese situation of kind of the race kind of situation, I think.
Okay. I do want to respond in particular, I think, to your first comment. And I think as an anthropologist, the thought that, people might not be thinking about a certain thing in a particular way, but you can see that reflected either in customary practice or in language usage. And indeed, as you say, there is absolutely no stigma to the idea of being from Ura Nihon, or the backside of Japan, but I think that linguistic usage does reflect a kind of customary organizing principle of hierarchy that is nonetheless hierarchical in terms of place. And for example, in nomenclature, let's go to our map, in Japanese linguistic usage, you go up to Tokyo, no matter where you're coming from. You're coming here, you go up to Tokyo. You're coming from there, you go up to Tokyo. You're coming from here, you go up to Tokyo, and you go down to everywhere else. That is a linguistic reflection of a hierarchical place positioning. There is also, and I think with younger Japanese, they will say that only exists with those words of Tokyo, but actually everywhere, in every place, every train line, every bus line is conceptualized in an up direction or a down direction. And that up and down does reflect a concept of a kind of hierarchical positioning of centrality and non-centrality as well. So you do see reflected in language usage a thought of which a kind of prioritizing of importance, whether people think about it that way or operate in their lives that way or not. So yes, I don't think anybody has a sense of any kind of stigmatization of being from the back of Japan. And I mentioned this, is a very prominent university professor at a very high-ranking university from that side of Japan, so not preventing him from having accomplished that. But nonetheless, actually interesting to me that he himself would, be willing to sort of state that, maybe this designation is, not necessarily liked, and that happening increasingly so. So I do think you have those kinds of senses built into customary practice and into linguistic usage.
Excuse me, when you still have the map there, may I just ask, where is Obama on that map? Which prefecture?
I'm not actually even sure it's not.
It's in Niigata.
Is it Niigata?
Yeah, I think so.
But I don't think we have it on this map. So
it's such a tiny little
area because it's just it's a town.
And it's called Obama. It's not Obama, And this is the problem. The American president's name, even the NHK's best top standard Japanese broadcaster says, Obama, President Obama did this, President Obama that went this. And this has been a real issue among many people in Japan. And I even wrote a letter to the NHK. President Obama's name is not Obama. Obama is the name of that little village.
Right. And there are different characters that can be used to write Obama. The Obama of Obama Japan, characters for Little Japan and Little Port, excuse me. You can also write Obama with the character for Big Port, and so you get those differences as well. But okay.
Great. Well, thanks everybody for coming in. Thank you.